This is podcast number 30.
Would you like to tell our fine listening audience what parent challenge number 2 is?
Parent challenge number 2 is finding time this month, I guess it is, to share something about your past history, something from your childhood, some memory of your family, something that you specifically went through, what it was like maybe when you were a child. It can be something as simple as these are the kinds of clothes we used to wear back then, way back then in the olden days. Or it could be the kinds of songs that you really like to listen to, and you can play a song for them, or you can tell them an anecdote about something that happened in your family that was really funny or really difficult. Or you can just kind of do a flashback based on something your child is going through.
There you go. If you're familiar at all with Facebook, they have little quirky things they do. Throwback Thursday, I believe.
Yes.
I believe Flashback Friday is one of the happening things.
I don't know.
Well, let me
Sounds
tell you.
like the same thing as Throwback Thursday.
Kind of does, yeah. Kind of does. Might be wrong on that one. But hey, this is Flashback February.
There you go. Very good.
Yeah, so we're going to coin that in the Parenting on Empty world as, at least for 2015, Flashback February.
There you go.
So yeah.
And the reasoning for this is, I think a lot of times we get sort of caught up in the whirlwind of just parenting for today and taking care of our kids' needs and making sure that we're communicating, that kind of thing. And we sort of forget that they don't really think of us as people who have a history. And sometimes I think we're just vending machines. Other times we're just maids and manservants. Other times we're just chauffeurs.
Right.
And I think what sharing a little bit of your history and finding moments of connection where you look at something they're going through or something they're experiencing and you say, you know, when I was a kid, this is what it was like, or this is what I went through, or this is what I felt like. And when you do something like that, it humanizes the parent, which sounds kind of silly, but in a way, kids lots of times don't really think of their parents as regular people just like them who have feelings and experiences. And many times they're absolutely shocked about things that you did when you were a kid or feelings that you had and how similar it is to theirs. So I think it's another way that we can connect with them and can make sure that they begin to grow into an understanding that adults are people too.
Right, they have a history. And we, like you said, sometimes kids forget that, sometimes mom and dads forget that. An example, just the other day I was talking to our oldest, Mariah. Now, you know I'm on a mission to have the family move into a tiny house.
I'm well aware of that, but it's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
But it's good to have a goal.
Yeah, right. As futile as that goal may be.
Yes.
So anyway, we're talking about that, and I enjoy watching that show called Tiny House Nation. And I don't know if we had been watching one of those shows, but I was talking to Mariah, telling her we just have to slowly keep working on Mom to move into the tiny house. Just incrementally, we'll just keep suggesting things. Of course, Mariah is not on my side. She has no desire to move into a tiny house either. So, but anyway, I was telling her this evil plan that I have. And then I said, you know, it's part of our heritage, living in a tiny house. And she said, well, what are you talking about? And I said, well, my parents lived essentially in a tiny house. She said, really? What do you mean? What are you talking about? That house out in Lyons? That seemed pretty big. I said, no, actually, after they both retired, they sold that house and the property, and they bought a fifth wheel, which is essentially a tiny house, and a truck, and they went around the country, and they joined an organization called Craftsmen for Christ, and they helped different churches build extra rooms or auditoriums or whatever it was that the church might be wanting to build. And so they'd get a bunch of volunteer work, and that's what they did. And they lived in this fifth wheel for several years. So, and I was telling her that story, and she had no idea that was a part of her grandparents' history. Mm-hmm. And I kind of, forgot about that. I'm not sure if forgot is the right word, but, I thought...
We forget that they don't know.
Yeah.
Because we lived through it, and it's very familiar in our memory. We forget that our kids didn't experience that, and so it's not something that's in their memory. I did the same thing with her the other day. We were talking about motorcycles, and I said to her, I had some interesting experiences on a motorcycle, and she's looking at me like, you rode a motorcycle? And I actually had a very, very interesting experience on a motorcycle when I was driving it. And she was absolutely shocked. She just can't imagine that I ever drove a motorcycle. She could vaguely imagine that I might have ridden on one, but I never would have driven one. And so, she is looking at me with this completely different expression. I'm having to recalculate everything she thought she knew about me. And then I talked to her about your mom and dad and how they also traveled on a motorcycle. Mm-hmm. And that your dad a couple times took me on the back of his. Of course, his motorcycle was like a motorhome. It was beautiful and it was comfortable.
Right.
And it was not like a motorcycle at all.
Not your crotch rocket.
No, it was not. It was very nice. But it was something, it never had occurred to me to tell her before. And I told her about one of my really, not traumatic, but funny experiences on a motorcycle. And then we talked about experiences friends of ours have had on motorcycles and that they're dangerous. I remember why it came up. We were talking about getting her driver's license. And she's always been bitter about the questions on the test that are about motorcycles. And I said, well, a lot of it is they want you to be aware of motorcycles. They want you to know how dangerous it is. And I told her about some of the things that I knew and friends we have, experiences they've had on motorcycles that have been pretty bad because it's a dangerous mode of transportation, especially when everybody else is in cars. If they get in an accident, the car person is far more protected than the person on the bike.
Right.
So that's how it all started. And then I thought, I think she would remember everything I'm saying a lot better if I linked it with a memory about me or about people she knows.
Right.
And so I tied those in, and she really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah. I think one of the other reasons it can be a fun challenge to talk about your history is that you are communicating a story about yourself in a positive way. And what I mean by that is sometimes when we drag up our history, sometimes it's used as a tool or a weapon to belittle our children's circumstance when they talk about, man, I had to walk a couple of yards to school. Well, the old classic, when I was a kid, we had to walk to school 15 miles uphill both ways in the snow.
In the snow.
Right, even in the springtime there was snow. So, we always tell these stories about our history and how tough we had it and how good they have it, our children have it. And so it becomes more of, oh, great, another story about all the hard times you had. And so it's always probably taken in a negative light. And so this is a way of telling a story, not because you want to show your kid how hard you had it or how easy they have it. It's just to communicate
to share a part of yourself.
A part of yourself, right.
Yeah. And to give them a broader understanding of their family history, heritage, etc.
Yeah.
I know when we built our house, my dad was really the driving factor behind all of it. And every day we would sit outside as we were building the house. We would sit down at noon hour to eat our lunch. And my dad was never a person who talked a lot. But for some reason, that particular context, he was doing something he loved to do, construction. And he was outside. He loved being outside. He was an outside kind of guy. And for some reason that just brought out his instinct for storytelling. And so every noon hour as we'd be eating our lunch, my dad would launch into some story about things he went through when he was young.
Right.
And I had heard some of those stories before, but a lot of them, that was my first time ever hearing them. And I found myself absolutely fascinated because it gave a whole different dimension to my father. He came across to me as a guy who just knew pretty much everything about construction, everything about practical stuff about making things work, whether it's mechanics or plumbing or electrical wiring or building a house, because he was a problem solver.
Right.
And he'd been doing it for a long, long time. And as he told these stories, I kind of came to the conclusion he learned 90% of what he knew through the School of Hard Knocks.
Right.
He made so many mistakes. It was trial and error. And I mean, it's God's grace that he was still alive with some of the mistakes that he made. He just didn't always know stuff.
Right.
And that was really helpful for me. That here's this man that I thought, man, he just knew these things. He was born knowing these things. And to recognize, no, he came to know these things because he tried to do stuff that he didn't know how to do exactly.
Right.
And he was willing to fail, but he learned from those failures.
Yeah.
That's a great lesson.
Yeah. And storytelling for him was a way of communicating that.
Yes.
And, here was a man, your father, who went through World War II, the Korean War, was a paratrooper, and had just an incredible amount of experiences. And as you said, grew up on a farm and learned really by the seat of his pants how to do just about everything. And he wasn't the kind of guy who would give you instruction.
No.
And when, like you said, when we were building this house, he wouldn't say, here, let me show you how to do this. Let me show you how to do the plumbing or electrical or framing or whatever. I would just have to watch. Just pay attention to what he was doing. Mm-hmm. Ask him questions, and he'd answer, but not in detail. And then just imitate. But the detail of things he did would come, like you said, when we would sit down at lunchtime and he would tell stories.
And it really made me regret that he had never felt free to tell those stories before. And it has encouraged me to try to communicate my stories to the girls along the way. And my father's dead now, and so I have no chance of ever recapturing those. And I wish that I had heard them more often so I could remember them.
Right.
Having only heard a lot of them that one time, I've forgotten probably 90% of them. I just remember impressions, things that I took away. For example, wow, he didn't always know everything.
Right.
And thank you, Lord, for saving his life repeatedly. And a lot of other things, simply that it's a good thing to try stuff that you don't know you can do. Yeah. Go ahead, take the risk.
Right.
And that failure isn't the worst thing that could ever happen to you, which is an incredible lesson for me. I need to hear that repeatedly. So I took away the lessons and ideas and thoughts, but I don't remember the specific stories, and I wish I did.
Yeah. Right.
And if I'd heard them more than once, I think they would have stayed in my brain a little better.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But just remembering to share who you are as often as you can, I think will help deepen relationships with your children. I liked how you said it's kind of separated from both a disciplinary perspective and a superiority perspective. It isn't, and you should be like me. It's just, here's something I went through. That's all.
Right.
And I know that our kids are older, and so it's pretty easy for us to talk to them about stuff. When your kids are younger, they don't particularly have a very long attention span. And I mean, when your 1-year-old is sitting on your lap, it probably seems like a waste of time to tell them a story about yourself. But you know what? We read books to kids from the moment they are born. What's the difference?
That's true.
Why is it a good idea to read a book? And it's not a good idea to embed in their consciousness that a lot of what it means for us to have relationship is I tell you things about me, and you tell me things about you.
Right.
It's establishing this precedent for conversation. So I think it's a good idea no matter what age it is.
And you can be creative in that process with how you communicate the story. Maybe you have some old pictures in a shoebox laying around, and you could just pull out 10 or 15 of those pictures. You don't have to pull out the whole shoebox, but just pull out 10 or 15 of those pictures, have them sorted through the way you want to present them, and just have a little story time, especially perhaps with younger children who are going to be more visual, and you can show them pictures. Here's the house I grew up in, and here's the neighborhood, and here's a picture of me and my best friend. Or if you happen to be fortunate enough to have old home movies, we do. Maybe show 15 minutes of a home movie, a clip, and say, let me tell you the story behind this, what you're seeing.
Another way is we have kind of one of those Rubbermaid storage boxes that we have one for each of the girls, and that's where they put their memorabilia. Each year, at the end of the school year, they select the things they want to save, they think, for their future, and we put them in these boxes. You and I don't have one of those boxes, but I have a couple things from my childhood, from my growing up, and from my college days, and you have some things from your growing up and college days. And you could actually take one of those props, or whatever you want to call it, those pieces of memorabilia, and say, here's something from my childhood. For example, I have a stuffed animal that I kept who was, you know how Linus in Charlie Brown has a blanket that he cannot be separated from?
Correct.
This stuffed animal was my blanket.
Is that Beezer?
Beezer, exactly. And anytime I was separated from Beezer, life was not good for the entire family. In fact, they lost Beezer one time, and they literally drove 25 miles to the town where they had bought the first one and got a second one.
Wow.
Because I cried nonstop.
The backup Beezer.
Yeah, they never did find the original Beezer, so. And apparently I was satisfied with the replacement Beezer.
Yeah.
But for kids to see your memorabilia, for them to make this connection, oh, you had a stuffed animal that you loved, that you cuddled with when you were in bed. You had a blankie. I have my wedding dress still, and our older daughter saw it for the first time probably about 4 years ago. And, I mean, that was just such a big deal for her.
Yeah, that was.
Oh,
right.
This is your wedding dress. I have my mom's wedding dress, and it's a very significant thing for me, and I talked to her about it when I saw it for the first time. It was made of parachute silk, and that led to a whole discussion about why would you ever make a dress out of parachute silk? Well, because it was during war times, and that was the kind of material that we had, and your dad had been a paratrooper, and so there was all this significance as to why it was made out of parachute silk.
Yeah.
And when you look at the dress, it's a beautiful dress. The material's gorgeous, and it just led to not just one conversation, but a variety of conversations through the years.
Right, yeah.
As I would refer back to that. Remember that?
Yeah. So this is something you can tie in with maybe a regular thing you do in the family, maybe at mealtime, or if you have a game night, just kind of drop it in. I don't think it necessarily has to be, okay, I want to sit everybody down and tell you about my past.
No, you can do it when you're driving in the car.
Yeah.
Just connect it to something that you see outside, or something that comes up in the natural course of a conversation, like with Mariah and I when we were talking with Mariah and me. Oh, we were talking about her license and motorcycles, and I thought, I'm just going to tell her a little bit about my experience with motorcycles. Mm-hmm. And it was a very natural lead-in. She didn't even feel like this was a story about Mom.
Right.
It was just, we're just talking.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is Parenting Challenge number 2. Sharing a piece of your past.
Flashback February.
Flashback February.